up, and hello. Welcome to another episode of the Gilmore Way Podcast. Last week, we talked about all the guys on the show who were never quite right for our Gilmore girls. This week, we're going to explore how the big four main Gilmores reacted to all of the guys, at least the ones they knew about. Dear Emily and Richard really sets the stage for a lot of their feelings about who Lorelai should be with and why. And then we get Emily's reactions to Jess and Swansong. So we thought this would be a good time to examine some of the deeper attitudes of especially the elder Gilmores towards the partners chosen by the Gilmore girls, and also how Rory and Lorelai react to each other's love lives.
As always, this is your regularly scheduled reminder that this is a spoilers all podcast. Don't say we didn't warn you. And if you could do those YouTube things, like this video, subscribe to our channel, share and comment, we would be eternally grateful. It really does help us out.
Yes.
Let's dive into the synopses.
Let's. Season 3, episode 13, one of my favorite episodes, Dear Emily and Richard. Rory receives an invitation to Sherry's scheduled C-section, but when she goes into labor early, Rory finds herself Sherry's sole supporter at the hospital until Christopher arrives, so she calls in Lorelai for backup. Woven through the story of Gigi's birth are flashbacks to Rory's quote-unquote initial emanation, Lorelai figuring out she was pregnant when she couldn't fit into her debutante dress, the reaction of Emily, Richard, Straub, and Francine to the news, going into labor herself, seeing Rory in the nursery when Chris says they should get married, and when Lorelai leaves a letter for her parents that says she doesn't belong there and that she's leaving.
This is followed up by episode 14, Swan Song. And Lorelai heads to New York with Alex, Suki, and Jackson to see a new show, and she's worried that leaving Rory alone for the weekend might lead to some temptation for Rory and Jess. Emily finds out that Rory is dating a new guy and invites him for dinner, and Rory has to bribe Jess to attend. But when he shows up with a black eye, she pushes him on whether or not he got into a fight with Dean, and dinner is ruined. Rory goes to Dean for the truth, but he confirms they didn't fight. Jess finally admits to Luke that he was beaked by a swan that hangs out by the Larson dock, but then he lies about it to Rory and tells her it happened when he was tossing a football with some friends.
Flag on the play, Jess.
Multiple red flags.
Yeah. Appropriately enough for the football.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Soon enough, football season's coming. But I want to kick this off with a general question since we're talking about reactions to boyfriend. But this is more a question for how we react to partners on the whole. And I just want to kick it off with asking, why do you think we should care, if at all, and to any extent, and what extent, about what our family members think of our partners? I mean, should their approval factor in? Does it matter, or should we just immediately dismiss it?
That's a really good question. I say that a lot. You have good questions. I think it does matter. For those of us who are on good terms with our families, bringing in a partner means introducing a new person into an existing family with existing dynamics. Like there will be existing issues and baggage and tradition and expectation. And so for your partner to fit into that is a good thing. That's ideally what you would want. If you're more like the Gilmores and like you want to, limit interaction or you're kind of on the outs with your family, it's maybe not a huge deal unless there's like some sort of massive disagreement about some major thing in the relationship or in, like if they disagree with how and when you have kids, that kind of stuff. That's a pretty big issue. But it's not only how the new person integrates and gets along with everyone you've known and loved your whole life, but your family might also have expectations about the person you date too, which is kind of like what we're going to be digging into a lot tonight. And like in the case of the Gilmores, they were concerned about social status and wealth. And for example, Mrs. Kim is another interesting example because she cares about them being Korean and Christian. So each family is going to maybe have different expectations and stuff along those lines. It could be anything like social, cultural, racial, ethnic, economic, religious expectations or beliefs. I feel like religion is a big one in the world in general. Like that's a big sticking point for a lot of people. Like, at the end of the day, the bottom line is that our parents should just want us to be happy with whoever accomplishes that the best. But different cultures and generations will have different ideas about what relationships should look like and what an acceptable match looks like. And the unfortunate part is most of that is just antiquated bullshit. But that said, we shouldn't totally discount how our family feels, because like sometimes it can be a helpful indication of red flags in the relationship that we might be unknowingly overlooking. They might spot something that's a big deal that we're kind of like glossing over. So that's one area where it's like, you know, their opinion might actually be beneficial to us. But unless we're ready to completely cut out family members who don't like our partners, they will continuously have to interact as long as you're together. So you want there to be as much harmony as possible. You have to keep in mind that staying with a partner your family doesn't like could bring you a lifetime of grief, resentment, fighting, etc. I mean, look at Lorelai and Luke, right? Like there's a lot of resistance to that relationship, and we'll obviously get more into that specifically soon. But like, that's the kind of thing you're in for. You're in for people injecting themselves into your relationship constantly, and like unsolicited advice and opinions about one of the people you care most about in the world from other people that you also care about deeply. It can get very sticky and contentious. And like, if you stand firmly in the camp that your partner is your chosen person, hopefully that will help you overcome struggles in that area and will help you bridge the gap with your family members once they can see, like, hopefully they will get on board when they see how well you work together and understand why they're so important to you. But that doesn't always happen. And so I guess the answer to your question is it comes down to the reason that, like, maybe there's some strife or animosity and what the accompanying behavior to that is, like how aggressive or egregious their reaction to it becomes. You know, some things might be tolerable and others might not be. So it's not a cut and dry answer. But at the end of the day, we're a social species, and our primary social units are often our families. So the answer to the question ends up often having great, like, practical importance to us in all of our interconnected relationships. What about you? Like, do you have anything else or different on that? Like, do you agree, disagree? Am I off in the weeds on that one?
No, you're not off in the weeds at all. I mean, I think you said it perfectly. I will just extrapolate on 2 points. I do think that it can be very beneficial to have family members. And I say this, like, it's good to have them weighing in within reason. On the extreme end of the spectrum, and this is just, I almost want to say, like, content warning. Like, if you're in a relationship where there's just, like, domestic abuse happening and you're not seeing it or ignoring it and your family's weighing in that way, yeah, like, that's an example of, like, blatant red flag. Your family needs to, like, throw an audible and be like, nope. If they're weighing in for, you know, oh, you know, I don't like him because his hair's funny. Okay, well, just, you know, again, like, it needs to be, I think it's good to have family members just, like, looking in from, like, a care perspective, but it needs to be done in a way where it's just like, is what you're seeing accurate? Or are you just, you don't like the person to not like the person? There's a difference there, but you illustrated it well. So I do think it's good to have family members reacting and looking in to see what they can see. What Emily does a lot of the time, and I will just throw her under the bus specifically, is just hate on Rory and Lorelai's men because she doesn't live up to their standards. That's not okay, because it just goes back to what you said. You need to be happy for, you know, your daughter and your granddaughter, for the partner that they're with, if that person is making them happy and there's no really consequential things coming out of that relationship that are going to be problematic.
Yeah. We're going to throw Emily under the bus a lot tonight.
A lot.
Oh, it's going to be like Regina George up in here. All right.
So
I know, but it's fun.
She got hit by a bus.
Anyway, returning to the conversation at hand. Let's get started with Lorelai's guys. And let's start with Emily and Richard. But I want to start off this conversation talking about Christopher first, because in a lot of ways, he's where this all begins. So go in. Emily and Richard on Chris. Where do you stand? What stands out about that to you?
They're way too biased with him, solely because he is the father of Lorelai's child. And look, I understand to an extent, wanting Chris to be present in Rory's life for the sake of her having that father figure there, for him being in the home, for her being present and involved in her life. But sometimes I feel like, and I say sometimes, a lot of the time, Emily and Richard are so quick to bypass things that Chris is doing that is not okay, just because it's like, no, like he and Lorelai need to be endgame because that's the mom, that's the dad, that's what, is acceptable and what should happen. You guys parented this child together. You should have gotten married when you were 16. You didn't. It's not too late now. Go be that nice little nuclear familial unit. It's not how that always works out. Yes, they parented a child together. They were 16 when they did so. Doesn't mean it couldn't have worked, but it doesn't mean that it has to work. And if these two people are recognizing through trial and error, and they did go through numerous trials and numerous errors, that they are not the right people for one another, Emily and Richard need to be respectful of that and acknowledge that Christopher will always be Rory's father, but it doesn't mean that he and Lorelai need to be married, and you need to just back off and accept it, instead of trying to continually force them together, which is just going to not make anyone happy, to lead to so many fights and problems, which it does. Scale it back, scale your involvement back, and let these two people make that choice for themselves.
Yeah, all true. There's obviously the importance of, like you said, the nuclear family unit being important to them in terms of like, a child should have a mother and a father, and, the right thing to do, quote unquote, when you have a baby is to get married, because that's the socially acceptable thing. And on top of that, Christopher is of their social class and their social group. And so not only is it sort of the right thing to do from a perspective of giving the child both of her parents, and that being sort of like preferable to going it alone and cutting the father out, but also it's socially more acceptable that the father is from a wealthy family and he's of the right stock to marry their daughter, which is, again, just a gross attitude to have, and it kind of harkens back to the days when women were just property. So ick. But yeah, it leads to a lot of conflict, as you said. There are a lot of moments where Emily and Richard especially Emily, try to insert themselves into the equation when they shouldn't. And, the reactions when things go badly are always very overblown. Like, I could literally probably run through the seasons and enumerate the out of proportion rants that Emily goes on to Lorelai. Like, when Emily finds out that Christopher has a new girlfriend and that Rory is out with her right now, and she is like, that woman is going to try to get her claws into Rory. You can't let that happen. You should have been the one that he got his life together with. It could have been you. It should have been you. I have a lot more thoughts on that particular topic, but I'm going to save them for when we talk about Lorelai and Christopher a little bit more, and or maybe when we talk about fatherhood. But just throwing it out there that, like, a little off base, Emily. It's not the right way to go about it, to like put it on her as a responsibility. So I'm just going to throw that out there. Mm-hmm. Then we have Haunted Leg after, like, everybody gets really excited that Lorelai and Chris might finally get together, but then Sherry gets pregnant. Emily still tries to insert herself into the situation. She calls Christopher and you know, tries to, like, from the sounds of it, basically convince him to leave his pregnant girlfriend for Lorelai. Oh, so bad. But then eventually she kind of comes around and she sees how bad it is once Christopher shows up at dinner. Her reaction when Lorelai goes to the hospital to support Rory in this episode. And just, you know, like, how could you possibly be okay with, you know, going to the birth of Christopher's new baby with somebody else? Just, yeah. And then I think one of the most egregious is when she goes to Christopher at the end of Come Home and invites him to the wedding and is like, you know what, Chris, I've never really thought much of you. You're kind of spineless. And, like, you couldn't get your crap together to be with Lorelai before. But, like, now she's with someone who's unacceptable. And, you know, as much as I've never really thought much of you, you're the right kind of person we want for her. And, you know, it's not too late. You should basically come to this wedding and blow it up. So, thoughts?
F off.
In the words of Gail, F you and your mom and your sister and your dad. Yeah.
Great song, by the way.
Yeah, love that one.
Yeah, good one. Please stop inserting yourself into other people's lives and to other people's business. It is not your place. It is not your right. You're coming between people's happiness. These are grown adults that have the right to do and say what they please. And that is something that Emily can never understand, which is why we see this perpetuation of her just trying to insert herself into other people's love lives and their business. And I think that also stems from just a need to, like you said, sink the claws in and have that control, because I feel like perhaps there are like some, and you know, we've talked about this, like narcissistic tendencies that come into play where it's like you need to have that level of manipulation, but like, holy heck, that's so problematic for so many different reasons. So you need to, and I say like Emily needs to check herself, but she also needs to be checked. Richard doesn't do it. She doesn't really have anybody in her life that is checking her on this and being like, no. So she's just going to continue to do what she's doing because she thinks it's okay, even though she has no context or self-introspection to realize, like, you're actually being really problematic right now and potentially detrimental to a lot of relationships that would be fine if you just hadn't gotten involved.
Yeah, she really just needs to keep her nose out of it sometimes. But yeah, and going back to the idea of sort of like the heteronuclear family being kind of the only way to go about it and being the only right option, technically, in their eyes. It makes me think of that. I think it's a cold open when they're sitting there and things are awkward. And Lorelai picks up the newspaper and is like, oh my God, Shauna Christie shot her husband.
Mm-hmm.
And Emily's response was, at least she had a husband to kill. Just like that sort of the mentality of a woman's only value to that world as a whole is to be a wife and a mother. And so, you know, I think there are some genuine good, like, intentions when it comes to, yeah, the idea of them being a family unit and Rory having both her parents being active contributors to her life and being in a healthy relationship would be great. That's pretty generally recognized as a good thing. Not having that doesn't make your situation automatically terrible, but it's not always the way that things need to go. And another, like, again, I will go into more detail about this eventually, but going back to what I was saying about it should have been Lorelai, I think sometimes, despite the fact that, like, Chris isn't perfect and Emily and Richard know that, I think they see some potential in him that Lorelai didn't. And so they had a little bit of a finger on the pulse because, like, we see what he becomes when he gets together with Sherry. We see that there's something to work with, at least. And that he does eventually step up and step into the role of what he thinks he's supposed to do in terms of like being a breadwinner and keeping a job and buying a Volvo and all those things. Like eventually he can do it because he has structure and someone who's there to support him, as well as like being a support to someone else. So Emily can sometimes have this outside perspective that Lorelai's not really seeing.
Yeah.
But then there's these attitudes where it's more like, well, no, like you can't be an unwed mother. You can't be a single mother. Like, what would people think? The outside world? No, like women must be wives and mothers. Like emphasis on the wife. Like it's just, you know, the primary value that women get in the type of society that she associates herself with is how well they marry.
Yeah, I agree. Emily definitely has some backwards, antiquated views on things that need some course correction. But I'm not gonna sidestep Chris, but I do want to move us along to another perspective, which is Rory.
Yes.
How do you think she sees Christopher when he, like, you know, always your father from day one? That was never going to change. But when we see him come back in season 1, and Rory thinks he's going to stick around and be present, and then he's not. And then for all of the instances down the line that he continues to come back, and he and Lorelai try to have this relationship that time after time just never works out for a platitude of reasons. How do you think Rory views Christopher, not only as her father, but as like a partner for Lorelai? And how do you think she's gauging the situation? And is it healthy or unhealthy for her to have him reappear as often as he does?
I'm going to start with the last part of your question. Inconsistency with parents is not great. So I will flag Christopher for the fact that he does kind of come and go, maybe a little too much. I would prefer he came more, you know, and just was around more. That said, going back to the beginning of your question, when he comes back and Christopher returns, Rory's really excited to see him. We get the impression from the off that they have a good relationship, despite his sort of ephemeral presence in her life. And they don't see him that often. And he's never been to Stars Hollow. She's still pleased to see him. She's not angry. She doesn't resent him necessarily. At least not yet. And obviously that's the moment when Christopher kind of proposes to Lorelai in an inappropriate way. And Rory picks up on this. She picks up on the fact that, like, Chris is not only there to see her, but is also there to, like, shoot his shot again with Lorelai. And I think in general, rightly, she does turn him down. But Rory picks up on this and is like, he asked you to marry him, didn't he? So she's perceptive and she's recognizing what's happening here. She later says to Lorelai in like season 2, when Sherry does come on the scene, like Lorelai asks her, you know, should it have been me? Like, did you ever dream about your parents being together? And she's like, well, yeah, in the way that any kid whose parents are split dream about those kind of things. But like, I never really like held on to that or clung to it. It's kind of the vibe we get from her. I think she would generally like it if they had gotten together. I don't think she sees any, like, well, she's younger and maybe less experienced, but I don't think she sees any major red flags for her parents getting together. I think she mostly sees them as great friends who have great chemistry and great potential maybe for a relationship. And she would be supportive under most circumstances for that. And then things start to get more complicated when Sherry comes on the scene. Because, again, I will talk about this more when we talk about Lorelai and Chris. But Lorelai is the one who pushes Chris away. He came to town being like, I'm making changes. I want to be more a part of Rory's life and a part of your life if you'll let me. And she's like, well, I've always had the door open to Rory for you. And, you know, she tries to have this magnanimity, but she's the one who's like, I'm not going to marry you. You have no idea what it takes to be part of a family, without even like trying, without even giving him a shot to prove himself to her. And that keeps him a bit at an arm's length from their little family unit. And, there are merits to that. Like, they could be argued, and I'm sure we will in future kind of discuss the nittier grittier detail of that. We don't have time for it in this episode, but that's the effect. Whether or not it's right, that's the effect. Is he views it as a rejection and he leaves, which impacts Rory. And so when it looks like they're going to get together at the end of season 2 and Lorelai looks really happy, and Rory kind of has that moment of reckoning with Chris where she's like, you're going to be around this time, right? And he's like, yes, I promise you that I will do as much as I can to make this successful. So when he can't live up to that promise because of external circumstances that change the entire name of the game, then she gets resentful and she's like, go be someone else's dad, which is kind of harsh, frankly, because like he didn't necessarily put himself in the situation. He wanted to get out of that relationship. He didn't want to be with Sherry anymore. He wanted to be with Lorelai and Rory, but like it couldn't turn out like that. And so again, we'll get more into detail on it, but eventually she sort of reunites with them. That's what I was looking for. As Sherry gets closer to having Gigi, right? She opens the doors of communication back up because at the end of the day, he's her dad. And presumably she goes to their wedding and things are kind of quiet for a while, at least until season 5. Christopher doesn't show up at all in season 4. And then he doesn't come back till season 5, at which point he kind of tries to come to Rory being like, look, my relationship with my dad sucked and he's sick and I don't want that wall between us anymore. But Rory really just like shuts him down. She goes to him being like, don't call mom. Never call mom. If you need help, call me, call a nanny, whatever. Do not get involved with my mom because she's happy with Luke. And if you come around, it's just going to get messed up again. Which, again, you can argue the merits of whether that's fair or whether that's, an appropriate thing for her to say to her own father and like to not let her own mother, who's an adult, make her own decisions in that circumstance. And we will. In that circumstance, at the end of the day, it's up to Lorelai to maintain the boundaries of her relationships. It's not up to Rory, I don't think. But, and so when Lorelai invites Chris to lunch and Rory gets all butthurt about it, like, she acts like it's Chris's fault and then ices him out until she realizes that Strode died. And only then is she able to sort of like open up a little bit again and go to him and fix the situation. So their relationship is a real roller coaster ride. And I think most of the time, she loves her dad. And as long as her parents are happy, she's happy. But that doesn't erase the years of complications and the lack of his presence in her life in the early years.
Yep. I agree with all of it. There's not really too much more that I think I need to say right now because, again, I do want to save a lot of those arguments for the Lorelai and Christopher episode. But what just always pains me the most is what you touched on from the get-go is Christopher's in and outs of the relationship. If you want to be a father figure to Rory and you want to be present and be continually and actively present. If you cannot do that, and it sucks and that's hurtful, but it's not inexcusable if you really just have a career that's taking you elsewhere or you have a partner that's taking you elsewhere. Communicate that to your daughter and explain to her why you can't be around. Rory's 16. She's old enough to understand. You don't need to talk down to her or to like kid-splain stuff to her. But if you're going to be present, be present. And if you can't, tell her that and don't set her up with these expectations and false promises that you can't deliver on because it just hurts her time and time again. And that is why it skewers her perception of you, and why effectively down the line she is telling you to just go away. And I get it.
Yeah, we'll argue about all of this stuff a lot more. Like, not contentiously argue, but just like talk about this more when we talk about fatherhood, and eventually it's season 7 when we get to the Lorelai and Chris arc. I suppose that leads me to one last thing on Chris. I do want to move along because we've already been talking about him a long time. But in season 7, when they get married and she's not there, like that's a pretty egregious oversight. And yeah, she's mad not so much that they got married, but that they didn't include her, which completely understandable. Like basically her existence is the reason they're so connected at all, and it would have been right for her to be there. So that is a big thing. And so by the end of season 7, when they split up, she's like, Mom, I'm on your side. Like, I know that I don't have to pick a side, but I pick you. So there's that. But okay, so let's finish with Christopher for now, and we'll touch on him again, I'm sure, plenty in the coming like year and a half. And let's move on to Max.
Max Medina.
So Emily and Richard on Max. Go.
Probably more in line with the guy that they would want to foresee for her, as opposed to someone like Luke. But it's tricky because I feel like and I mean, we're going to talk about Luke, so I don't want to talk about him too much now. I don't feel like they ever gave either one of those men the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps a little bit more so in a quicker manner with Max, because he was a teacher at Chilton. So again, Chilton, that whole thing. I do feel like they would have been a little bit more quick to just embrace him and accept him into the family had that relationship continued and gone the distance and lasted longer than it did. So I don't want to like throw Emily and Richard under the bus all the time. I will give credit where credit is due. I feel like they did make an effort there to be a bit understanding and a bit like, okay, like let's see how this plays out. Certainly was not perfect. They did have instances of just questioning Lorelai on that relationship, but I feel like it wasn't necessarily a reflection on Max. I feel like it was just because they're always going to question their own daughter on her partnership choices, considering what happened when she was 16. And that's not cool, because you're just saying that you're going to invalidate relationships that she had because she messed up in your mind one time as a teenager. So, therefore she's not capable of just having healthy and mature relationships that are going to last, and you need to constantly check her on it. That's my long-winded way of saying, I don't think they crapped on him unnecessarily in the way they did with some of her other men. I think they tried to remain fair, didn't always succeed with it. But what do you think?
Yeah, we don't actually have them interacting with Max all that much. In fact, Emily kind of found out about the relationship because she heard through Biddy Charleston about the kiss in Paris is Burning. And of course, she reacts to that in terms of like, well, it looks really bad that you were seen kissing a Chilton teacher. Like, it's not really an appropriate relationship. But, presumably a teacher at a prestigious school like Chilton is at least a somewhat acceptable match. He's an intellectual and he's not exactly rich by any means. Most teachers are not. But, he's got a veneer of respectability about him, at least. He knows how to dress. He knows how to interact with the upper classes because he deals with the parents and the headmaster and all of those kind of people who are more in Emily and Richard's direct sphere. So, like, he has the social graces and the charm that they would hope for in a partner for Lorelai. So there's that. I think their issues with Max come more out of their strained relationship with Lorelai and her inability to include them in her life in any meaningful way. They're only really upset about the situation because Lorelai got engaged without telling them, and they had to find out about it from Suki. But in the end, Emily shows up for the bachelorette party and is at least somewhat supportive. Again, even though Michelle was the one who invited her and not Lorelai. And then in Road Trip to Harvard, when she finds out that the wedding is off, she seemed genuinely kind of like disappointed, being like, you're getting married this weekend. Why were you off in Harvard? Oh, the wedding is off. Like, okay. Like, I don't think she or Richard had any major problems with Max in that sense, which is, more than we can say for a lot of the other guys. But what about Rory?
We've talked about this when we did our Max Medina character study, but I always felt so bad for Rory within the context of the Lorelai and Max relationship, because she genuinely believed that this man was going to be her stepfather. She did form a level of attachment and care for him that went just beyond like a teacher and student in the classroom. I think she did start to see him as that, like, father figure, assuming that parental role. And that's hard when you think that that's what this person is going to be in your life. But on the whole, I think her response to him was good. She respected him. She saw, the intellect in him and why he could potentially be a good fit for her mother. And she responded well to him and to that entire relationship. So I was always very pleasantly surprised with that entire interaction and her response.
Yeah. Again, we have gone into copious amounts of depth about Max and Lorelai and Rory and that whole dynamic. But I think the most relevant thing for this conversation in terms of like reactions to each other's love lives is the fact that this is the first relationship that Rory is really aware of for Lorelai, because she kept that part of her life so separate for so long. And I mean, obviously it was difficult because this was one of her teachers. And so that added an extra layer of emotional processing that had to happen. But I found it interesting that this is kind of like the first serious relationship that Rory gets a chance to react to. And she's still young and she's going through a lot of changes at the time with Shelton and Dean and all these other things going on in her life. And so her initial reaction is a little bit like, are you kidding me with this? Mm-hmm. But yeah, she does eventually come around and she sees a possibility of a family with this guy. So it is kind of unfortunate when Lorelai calls off the wedding and leaves Rory kind of floundering, trying to process the emotion of that, not only for herself, but for her mom. When they go on the road trip and Lorelai refuses to talk about it. Like, oh, you're leaving her like hanging, Lorelai. Why are you doing this to her? So I think that was one of the ones maybe that emotionally affected her the most.
Mm-hmm. I would agree
besides maybe her dad.
Yeah.
So, all right.
For sure.
Quick and easy. Moving on. Peyton. Again, we talked about this last week with the bad boyfriends, but
yeah, there's not really too much more to say here, just because like it was not a relationship that lasted long. And I think it just stemmed from Lorelai being like, ooh,
shiny
he looks nice. He looks nice. But then it's like, ooh, never mind. And that has Emily up in arms because she's just like, you can't just like be one and done with this. So she does the whole try to reinsert herself thing again, because she's like, do you know how bad this is going to make us look? Emphasis on us and not on you. But it's like, sometimes that happens. Sometimes all it takes is one date to know, like, yeah, this is not going to be a thing. And I say Emily and Richard, but Emily specifically just needed to be okay with that. And she was not.
Yeah. I mean, we could have entirely skipped him off this list because he was such a one-off, but I did throw him on here in terms of him being a really great demonstrative of kind of why Emily and Richard behave the way they do when it comes to the girls' guys. Because, like, sometimes Lorelai, this sounds a little weird and I'm going to qualify it, but like sometimes Lorelai doesn't understand the impact that her choices have on her parents in terms of like their lives and their interactions with other people. And in this circumstance, Emily went out on a limb for her. Mm-hmm. And Emily's social rules are very different than Lorelai's. And it's kind of one of those things where like Lorelai just has her blinders on, like she's going to do what she's going to do. That doesn't mean that she should stay with Peyton, obviously. But she doesn't realize how much it might cost Emily socially and how important that is to Emily. Whether we think it's important or not is kind of beside the point, or whether Lorelai thinks it's important is beside the point. But she doesn't think beyond herself to be like, oh, now I put my mom in a bit of a sticky situation, and I hope it doesn't get too awkward for her. But that said, she makes a good point where it's like, Peyton's a grown man. His mom shouldn't care that much. So there's that.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just, we'll come back to it in like 5 minutes when we get to Jason, but it's sort of indicative of sort of like what happens when you start dating within that circle of like people that your family knows.
Yep.
What about Rory? Like, was there anything that stuck out to you? Like, I don't think there was much.
No, I mean, her interaction was pretty much just like a high and by moment. So what is there to really say?
Yeah, I guess the only thing I could say in general, it's not just about Peyton, but like just the amount that Lorelai and Rory talk about Lorelai's love life and like how much kind of detail and rundown Rory gets from her about her dates.
Mm-hmm.
And how, yeah, just how she kind of reacts to the news that this one was a dud.
Can't all be winners.
Exactly. Sorry, Dunham, not this time.
Yeah.
I have obviously Alex on the list, but I think we get absolutely zero interaction or even knowledge on the part of Emily and Richard about Alex. And so what I want to talk about with this is like a little more speculative. How do you think Emily and Richard would have reacted to Alex had she mentioned him or they met him?
I feel like, honestly, there would have been a different response from Emily and Richard. Normally, I feel like they're sometimes, like, there are a lot of the times they're on par with how they're responding to Lorelai's partners. But I feel like this is where we might have seen a deviation. Again, it's purely speculative. But Richard's a businessman. And at this point, Alex was trying to, get his own coffee shop and his own small business up and running. I feel like Richard might have respected the entrepreneurship that he was seeing in him and been like, this is an okay guy, because, he respected the same thing certainly in Christopher, where he, even makes that comment. He's like, oh, Christopher's doing really well in California. He's really getting himself going. I feel like from a business standpoint, Richard might have been a bit more like, yeah, all right, I can get on board with this guy. And then I feel like Emily would have just been like, no, doesn't have enough money. His business opportunities and what he's trying to pursue is not going to be enough or good enough for what I want for Lorelai. And I just feel like she would have been like Trix 2.0 at the dinner table, just being like, ugh, really? Like, I will do whatever I can to make this end as quickly as possible.
Yeah. I see what you mean about Richard and the entrepreneurial spirit, but Luke has the same thing in terms of like, he started a business for himself. But in Richard's eyes and Emily's as well, that wasn't enough. He needed to franchise. He needed to like be a big deal. He needed an investment banker and like multiple properties, and he needed to be a big wig, a big shot. And he wasn't. And so we have no idea that Joe and Alex want to make this a coffee chain. So far, it just seems like they just want to start a business together and see how it goes. And his background prior to that is ironwork, which is, I don't actually know much about it. Like, I think you could probably make decent money doing it because it is a skilled trade, but it's a little more blue collar, and yeah, probably not enough money or social standing out of that for Emily's liking. And not only that, but he's a divorcee with 2 children. Like she doesn't seem to take kindly to that. Like, yeah, I don't think she would have been super approving of him, because he's basically like Luke. He's like a precursor to Luke. He is basically Luke. He likes fishing, and the only difference is that he was like previously married with 2 kids, whereas Luke only has 1 kid that he doesn't find out about until after all of this is over. So he is very much of the same social class and standing as Luke in her eyes, and therefore he would probably be rejected.
That's fair. I concur.
Yeah. And then, with Rory, again, we just get sort of like basic reactions out of her on him. Like
you're going fishing.
Yeah.
Okay.
She does get all the books to help Lorelai prepare for the date. That's something, I guess. And then she's like the only one who remembers he exists once we get to later in the season. So,
which is surprising considering how dismissive you can be of your own partners and forgetting of their existence. But that's okay. We'll get to it.
Wow, that was a connection I didn't draw yet. So, well done. All right, speedily moving on to Lorelai's men. Oh boy, Jason.
Digger
Stiles.
Digger Stiles. I'm just gonna lead off with a heavy hitter. Excuse me, you're suing my father?
We'll get there.
What?
That's more of a Lorelai reaction to him than their reaction.
But reactions in general. That was never going to be taken lightly, obviously. You go into this as business partners, thinking that you're going to be successful, acquire all of these new clients, make this money. And then obviously shit hits the fan down the line. And now there's this lawsuit going on. But to start out, I think they were they would have been very just over the moon to have those two end up together. I don't understand. I mean, and this is why, I don't fully understand. I do, but I don't. I don't fully understand why Lorelai tried to hide this relationship early on for as long as she did. Because it's this is the type of guy that your parents would probably actually approve of and be like, ooh, yes, finally, Lorelai, a winner. Money, good name. We already know, his parents. And I feel like it all would have been, really kosher and really just good for everybody involved. Lorelai hides it because that's just, I think, the nature and the relationship that she has with her parents at that point. But when they do eventually figure this out, it's not like, oh, the world is ending until, again, the lawsuit. But again, just good reactions, and I think that it would have been an even better scenario had Lorelai not hit it for so long, but that's what we were left with.
Yeah. Once again, Lorelai neglects to include her family in a major portion of her life. And for 5 months, she hid it from them. That's big. You're right. I get it. It could complicate things, both in their relationship and for her and her family. And Emily can run really hot and cold on Digger. One moment she's like, Digger's great. We love Jason. And then the next she's bitching about him. But that's more of her own baggage. After he suggests they go to Atlantic City instead of having a dignified cocktail party. That's when she starts to sour on him. And so it's more her sort of personal reaction to sort of his undermining of her position in Richard's life and business that bugs her. And so, but I wonder if Lorelai had revealed it to them, if she would have been if she had warmed back up to him a little bit and been like, you know what, I approve of this match. But it was kind of her ragging on him that prevented Lorelai. She was literally going to do it. And then Emily just went off on a rant about him. So, it was a complicated web of emotions at play for that particular relationship. So, yeah, it was bad. We're going to talk about Jason more when we get to season 4, obviously. And I have a lot more thoughts on him and the lawsuit. We will get there. I already have 24 pages on just Rory's felony alone. So brace yourself for my legal analysis of Gilmore Girls.
Wait, what?
Including
Rory's a criminal? Spoiler.
Yeah, I know, right? Get ready for that. But speaking of Rory, what about her reaction to Jason?
I mean, again, limited interaction. So I don't really know how much there is to say there. Again, I feel like she was just and would have been very blasé about it at that point, especially because, she's transitioning into a college career and a career path right now. So she's got her own stuff going on. I think that she would have just been like, you know what, Mom, you do you. If this guy's going to make you happy, go for it.
Yeah. I think Lorelai tends to have a more involved reaction to Rory's relationships than the other way around. I think Rory's just kind of like, cool, Mom, why are you telling me this?
Because you're my best friend.
She just likes to support her mom and be like, so how's Jason? Yeah. She likes to ask the question and just make sure things are copacetic, but she just doesn't, especially now that she's not living at home, it doesn't impact her as much. So, All right. We've already been talking about 50 minutes, and we haven't even gotten to the real bread and butter of Lorelai's relationships. Luke
Danes.
Luke Danes.
Emily is so, I say so night and day, more night than day, but like we see in season, like early on, when they have the hospital interaction and she's realizing that the chemistry is there between the two of them. And she even says to Luke, she's like, you guys are both just idiots. Like, what are you doing? She recognizes that the chemistry is there. It's been telegraphed to us from early on. She sees it. But then as the seasons progress, she really railroads him and his career path. And just, the whole notion of like, you're not good enough. You're never going to be good enough. You don't belong in Lorelai's world. You don't belong in our world. Why don't you just go back to Stars Hollow, go run your diner, do your own thing, but GTFO out of our life. There's a contrast there with her, like, and it confuses me sometimes with her recognizing the chemistry, but then just being like, you're not good enough for my daughter. It goes back to like, just be happy for your kids and respect their partner choices. She can't do it. And she treats Luke really just like dirt a lot of the time, to put it as nicely as I possibly can. But go on.
Yeah, that's putting it very mildly. She is awful to Luke. Kind of beginning at the start of their actual relationship in season 5. We get the scene where Richard goes golfing with him and Emily insists on a dinner. And, just Emily's entire attitude toward him is like, how about a beer, Luke? And she's like, oh, the workman must have left his filthy truck in our driveway. And then she's just so fake and so obsequious this whole time. And I'm like, oh, that's so bad. And, and then Richard comes in and is like, well, your mother's met him and now I need to meet him. And I'm going to take him golfing. And I'm going to introduce him to an investment banker and an art guy. And we'll get him some golf clubs and we'll make him respectable so we can take him around the club again. So that's gross. Yep. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, we have the wedding. Them going to Christopher, or Emily specifically going to Christopher, is what blew up the relationship with Luke. And Lorelai and Rory are understandably devastated by this. And once it's clear to her that there's going to be no forgiveness or acceptance of this on either of their parts, she goes to Luke and has that whole conversation about like, my daughter's made her choice, God help her, but you're the one that she wants. Go back to her. I won't meddle anymore. Mm-hmm. And then in the next episode, when Lorelai is still not coming to dinner, like she thought that would fix the whole thing. And Lorelai is still not forgiven them for what happened. Like just because they were able to repair the damage doesn't change that Emily was the one that broke them up in the first place. But of course, Emily and Richard sit there like, that guy's so stupid. He couldn't even understand what I was telling him to do. He must not have gone back to her. Obviously, he's just dumb. Like, oh my God, the condescension from them in that moment is just so awful. And, it doesn't really get much better in the future. And, yeah, she got her filthy diner owner back. Like, Oh,
Mhm.
just the
Gosh.
attitude is infantilizing toward both
Yep.
of them, and I hate it. So, and that's emblematic of their response to all of Lorelai's choices. Basically, it's like it's infantilizing her. It's not letting her have any autonomy in her relationships.
Mhm.
Not thinking that she's smart enough to make this decision for herself.
Yep.
What about later in their relationship? Like once we get to season 6, they kind of get on board with him a little bit, and the revival. Like, what's your take on their sort of later?
Yeah, I think it was just also stemming from personal growth that they had done, and especially in the revival once Richard has passed. I think that really leads Emily to contend with the fact that, your family is not going to be around forever. Death is a part of life. Um, maybe loosen up, the emotional just baggage that you've been dumping on Luke and your daughter regarding this relationship. Um, I think she, again, it's sad that it takes it, but I think Richard's passing maybe just has her like, do a check on herself and just be like, I need to be okay with this, because if I continue to let this be a cause of strife between myself and my daughter, we're going to miss out on dinners. We're going to miss out on large and important parts of each other's lives going forward. Um, so I think they do better towards the later seasons with just being more accepting of her and her happiness. And again, especially Emily in the revival. But I hate that it takes such a traumatic event and such like a death and a passing to even have Emily get on board with it. It shouldn't take something like that. Just that's your daughter. Support her choices of a partner if this is the guy that's making her happy and it's a healthy relationship.
Yeah, I also find it interesting how Richard was basically still trying to puppet their relationship from the grave by putting in his will that Luke gets a bunch of money, but it has to be used for a franchise. And then Emily and Luke kind of go behind Lorelai's back, kind of unknowingly to Emily at first. Like, well, she's the one who calls only Luke, and she expected to have dinner with just him without Lorelai. So it seems like they were kind of like trying to keep her out of this for some unknown reason. But like, just going behind her back to look at properties for expansions for the diner. And yeah, so even in death, his presence was felt when it comes to like, yeah, we kind of got on board with you, but like we still want you to do this because we think it's the best chance at financial growth and plenitude for you both going forward. Like the only way to protect your future is to become an uber capitalist. So
Great.
that was interesting. But let's move on to Rory and her reaction to Luke, because I think this is probably like where she exerts the most of her opinion, because early on when Lorelai's like, what do you think about Luke? She's like, no, you can't date Luke because it's going to make things too complicated.
Yeah.
But then when they do get together, she's very supportive and like goes so far as to ice Emily out when Emily tries to interfere and break them up. So like, what about Rory?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like she was probably the one who equated her mother's happiness into, the entire situation the most. And I think that stems from just how long she's known Luke herself. But I think she recognized here's a partner that is probably actually going to be really compatible and good for my mother when all of the other men were not for reasons XYZ. And she has known him long enough in her own life to again know of his character, of his personality. So I think that's why it's so much easier for her to just be so instantly, not instantly, because like you said, she did have her hangups early on, but just down the line, I think it was easier for her to come to terms with, perhaps even more so than her father, because Luke has been present the most in her life when even Christopher wasn't, when these other men weren't. So of course it's going to be just again like easier for her to just be okay with this relationship and to accept Luke for that place in Lorelai's life now. So her reaction is, I think, for the most part, just predominantly, I'm okay with this because I know him to be a good person myself.
Yeah. I mean, I will point out that like Luke has a bit of an unfair advantage in that he was born and raised in Stars Hollow. Of course he's around more. Chris isn't from there. So
yeah, but I even just meant like the whole like coffee diner food thing.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and like I get that, but I hear it a lot where people are like, Luke's always there for Rory. Like, yeah, he lives in town. He's just kind of like there by default.
Yeah.
Can't give him that much credit for like living there. But moving on from that, I think we've been talking about Lorelai's guys maybe long enough. Just an hour in. Let's move on to Rory's guys. So starting from the beginning.
Oh boy.
The first meeting of Dean and Emily.
Oh man. Please don't shit on a teenage boy in the way that you did. I mean,
Phrasing. Anyway, continue.
Sorry, not sorry. You should never talk to or speak to or treat anybody like that, but especially someone where it's like, this is your granddaughter's first boyfriend, first relationship. She obviously cares deeply or enough about him that she's willing to bring him to a Friday night dinner, allow you to meet him, and have this level of involvement. I'm sure there was some trepidation about that. And especially I will throw Richard under the bus for this one, for like just the 21 questions effectively that he instantly hits me. Where are you going to go to college? What do you want to do in life? Are you like, on the whole, grades
you get?
Yeah. It was him just essentially being like, I need to determine if you're going to be good enough for Rory. Answer these questions. And I think perhaps even Richard knew that like he probably was not going to provide satisfactory answers. And so when Dean flounders and he's just like, well, I don't know. I don't know what I want my life to look like yet. I'm still thinking about it. Like, I don't know what college I want to go to. That's fine. That's a normal thing. Dean needs to take time to figure that out. But for Emily and Richard, that was never going to fly. And so they just instantly come down on him. They're so quick to just be like, I'm dismissive of him, therefore Rory needs to be dismissive of him. This is not someone that I can see or want my granddaughter to end up with. And it hurts Rory. And they didn't even take that into consideration either, because then dinner ends abruptly. And Rory is rightly PO'd by it, because you can't treat my boyfriend like that. That's just not okay.
Or just don't treat people like that in general. Yeah, classist jerks.
You know what? Yep.
Yeah. They were the a-holes. If we did an AITA for Richard and Emily, it would just be like, am I the a-hole? Yes, you are.
Yes. Do you need context on the situation?
No. No discussion required. Just the a-hole across the board. Yeah. Emily's first meeting with him was quite brief, but it wasn't like a great start when he didn't observe the social niceties of coming to the door and introducing himself. Although I don't know if he knew that Emily was going to be there, and like he'd already met Lorelai, so like, why is this a big deal? They sort of agreed to do this, but she's so caught up in her social requirements for people and manners and all those kinds of things that she was like, you don't just go out when a boy honks. Like, okay. All right, Miss Manners, fine. And then obviously her perception of him is colored quite a bit by the fact that, they fell asleep and Rory didn't come home, and just like the sheer panic of that moment and the fight that came out of it, and just dredging up all the feelings of like, oh crap, what if Rory goes the same way as Lorelai? It was unfounded at the time, but it was very much a real possibility in Emily's mind that, even smart girls can get into trouble that way. So not a good start. And then we have the dinner that you started talking about as well. And, she opens the door and sees who Rory decided to bring. And it's Dean. And she's like, oh no, not this guy. Oh crap. And like, he doesn't make the greatest second impression with her either, because like, first off, his choice of outfit Again, not really up to Emily's standards. A little too casual. He's wearing like a seashell necklace. Like, why? Why did boys insist on that in like 2001? It was a bad time for humanity. But yeah, just sort of not appropriately dressed for the occasion, which is an indication of his lack of social awareness. And not only that, but his comment about how huge their house is like an immediate ding, 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 ding in her mind of like, this guy is not from the same social stratus as we are. If all he's commenting on is like, wow, like I've never been to a house this huge before. Like, at least if he had commented on the architecture or some sort of significant feature that might have impressed her that could have gone.
I wonder what it takes to insure this place.
Yeah. That would have gone well with Richard, I'm sure. She says as she rolls her eyes sarcastically. But yeah, like he already kind of doesn't quite stick the landing on that initial interaction while they're still outside. She can tell that he just doesn't understand, you know, the social requirements and niceties of their class. And then I love that interaction where like it becomes a funny joke, but it's also indicative of larger attitudes too, where Lorelai suggests Dean will have a beer. It's like, it's obviously a joke because he's underage and they're not going to serve him beer. And then he freaks out and Rory saves the situation with, they're like, I'll have a beer.
Yeah.
So it's cute. But if you fast forward to season 5, when Lorelai brings Luke around and Emily's like, how about a beer, Luke? And Lorelai has to inform Luke that like beer is code for nitwit juice in this house, basically. Like there is a sort of like a class association with drinking beer. It's seen as a lower class, blue collar kind of thing, whereas their drinks of choice would be single malt scotch.
Yep.
Bottles of Dom Perignon. Red wine with a fruity bouquet and nice legs, you know? Just that sort of the culture and taste associated with even, you know, the beverages that we choose, and you know how that can kind of like tie to table manners and, you know, knowing which fork to use. That kind of stuff is all sort of wrapped up in the socialization of kids from upper classes, right? Like you see it in Lorelai's first cotillion when they're teaching Charlotte all the forks. That kind of stuff. Again, indicative of these people not being good enough. So it puts him firmly in the middle class. He doesn't have the same refined tastes as they do. And like that kind of thing changes the way you even move through the world. It's funny, I was watching a video earlier about Oxford and just how like what the culture at Oxford is like. And a lot of people who go there are like very rich and come from like completely different social class, even than the Gilmores. Like we're talking like next level posh British people who like if you're from what they call a state school, like, you know, you're just from any old high school in the north of England and you come in to Oxford, you're going to see people who are just like they know instinctively which fork to use, and they're going to spend loads of money on drugs, and they're going to make fun of the way you talk for not being proper. And it's the same thing that's happening here. There are these spaces where your class is very apparent just from the way you speak, the way you carry yourself, and the types of things that you involve yourself with. And that's very apparent with Dean's arrival at the Gilmore house. And you can see a contrast between him and Logan later as well. Like Logan has an easy grace at the Gilmore house. Like he belongs there. He knows what he's doing. He comes with fancy cigars and wunderschön chocolates for Emily. And like, yeah, I don't know. And you're right. Richard, like coming out swinging on the college stuff is just more classist bullshit because it's like it's culturally loaded for him to ask that question given their beliefs on education, which we'll talk about more next week. But, you know, credentials mean something to these people. And so, yeah, he says to Rory, like, this family has standards. You live up to them, and you should make sure that like everyone you associate with lives up to them also, because you will learn that people will hold you back. So his just like whole belief around Dean not being good enough for her, like, you're special and he's not, and you're high class and he's not, it's just, it's really gross. It's a way for them to try to like indoctrinate Rory into their way of life, and like their concern with the continuance of the family's social position, their place in the capitalist hierarchy. And if Dean's not going to go to a good school and get good grades and get a good job, like he's not going to be able to support Rory in the way that they think is appropriate for her.
Very nice soapbox.
Thank you. I love a good soapbox. Mine is, it's great. It's covered in glitter sequins. I've decorated it now because I spent so much time on it.
Yeah, rightly so. Let's move us along. How do we see Lorelai responding to Dean? We talked about Emily and Richard's response. Talk to me about Lorelai's response.
Why don't you talk to me about Lorelai's response? Because I just talked for like 4 minutes straight.
Okay, that's fair. I think Lorelai gave him as much graciousness as she could allow, but she also was good to call out bad behavior. I mean, the whole, you stayed out all night and slept in Miss Patty's studio. Yeah, not great, especially, that's still a minor living under your house. She didn't know what could have gone down. We've talked about this. I think, she handled it a bit rashly, but I think she was just concerned for her daughter. And she could have just blacklisted Dean in her mind from then on out. But she gave him chances and was forgiving and just allowed him to continue to come into their home, be a part of Rory's life. I mean, she even, says after all is said and done, like, you got really lucky with him. He was a great first boyfriend. So for all the times that she was concerned, I think it was just stemming from a good place. But I think she was always just very cautiously eyes wide open, but good about allowing Dean space with Rory to like have time to themselves to explore that relationship. I mean, again, aside from orchestrating the first date, which just we've talked about that too. I think she was good about responding to Dean and recognizing him for just the stand-up guy that she saw him out to be at that point. It certainly is a contrast to how she responded to Jess, which we will get to very quickly.
Indeed. Yeah. She was a little harsh on him at first during the movie night that she orchestrated. She wanted to make sure that he wasn't going to mess around with her because she just wanted to do what she could to protect Rory's heart. Pretty understandable. And then I think she respected him a lot after he came to her and said what he said about the situation at Miss Patty's. And after that, she trusted him a lot more. Obviously, she kind of took Rory's side after the breakup, not knowing that he was the one who said, "I love you." And the minute she found that out, she sort of like let all that go. And she went to Rory and talked to her and helped them patch things up a little bit. And yeah, from then on out, she was respectful of their relationship and she liked him. She generally thought well of him and tried to stand up for him to other people when necessary, especially her parents. And then even when they got back together in season 5, despite the situation at hand there, she eventually got back on board with whatever was going to make Rory happy. She's like, this is bad, but if you want to be together, be together. I think actually this is a good place to maybe address the Lorelai Dean chemistry that everybody likes to talk about, because I think it spins out of this in terms of like her willingness to go to Dean and be like friends with him or to extend an olive branch even when he and Rory weren't together. And there are a few moments where I can see what people are talking about, or like why those situations might be right that way. But I think it's a combination of Lauren Graham just having easy chemistry with people she works with, and Lorelai's general flirtatious nature that brings out most of this. Like Lauren Graham could have chemistry with a cow gravy boat, and she does. She literally does. Like Lauren is so good, and I think she's like this with a lot of characters, but we just don't track it in the same way as we do with Dean for some reason. I think it's because he's the only one of Rory's boyfriends that she was almost exclusively positive about. And so, like, she's obviously not going to be flirtatious with Jess or Logan because she doesn't really like them at first. But when you look at her interactions with, like, everyone else, it's just kind of the way she is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she's just not as approving of those other guys. And so that's where I think it comes from a lot, where it's like, it's all relative. She's friendlier and she's more comfortable with Dean. And so she's a little more out there about it. I never picked up attraction between them. I just always assumed it with Lorelai being Lorelai. And I think it goes along with like other things about the show that people pick up on and make a big deal about, but that weren't actually put into the writing. Like they weren't meant to be there, but people read it that way because they're like projecting onto the situation. So
Yeah.
I think it's a combination of like Lorelai's issues with boundaries and her inappropriate behavior and her flirtatious nature, and Dean's confidence with her, like his ability to talk to this other grown-up without too much hesitation because of their like weird, unique history. Like you don't see a lot of relationships like this, and pretty much any other teenage show at the time probably would have leaned into this. But that's not what was there, and so I think people are like exaggerating it a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, I agree. I never saw that for myself. I always just saw it as Lorelai, like you said, extending the olive branch. I don't think there was any sort of weird sexual chemistry there. I hate when I see it or read about it. It just kind of like makes me like eye roll and want to gag a little bit. I think she was just really trying to just be a nice fellow Stars Hollow resident to Dean and you know say like, look, it didn't work out between you and Rory. Doesn't mean we always have to be at odds with one another, nor should we be. This is a small town. We're going to see each other. Let's just be civil. And I think Dean recognized that and was just like, I appreciate that. And yes, please, let's just go that route.
Yeah. All right. Moving on. Tristan Dugray. We don't have much to say on this one, but like Richard seems pleased that Rory is making friends with him.
Of course he is. Oh, Mr. Dugray.
Yeah. Any relation to Janlin Dugray? Oh, yes, sir. He's my grandfather.
My grandfather.
Like,
oh, nice man.
Yeah, Rory, I approve.
Excellent friends.
Yeah, exactly. So that's gross. That's pretty much all we get on Tristan. And like, I don't think Lorelai meets him or knows much about him or like has any particular feelings. So unless you can think of something, we can probably just sort of gloss over him.
I'm fine with glossing over Tristan.
All right. And that brings us on to one Jess Mariano. And I have to point out my Kindred Handicrafts shirt that says, well, what is much with the book.
Very nice
This
shirt.
I got this as part of the like FanFest merch from 2020.
Mm-hmm.
They have really cute t-shirts. And obviously I had to get it, not because of any real, connection or loyalty to Jess, but simply because I'm a professional bibliophile and I had to, address the reading in the show. I am Team Logan. But also, we happen to be recording this on one Milo Ventimiglia's birthday. So I think it's very fitting that I should pick this shirt today.
Happy birthday, Milo.
Happy birthday to the namesake of my soulmate, my dog nephew.
Your soulmate.
Our soulmate.
Yeah,
the love of my life. Milo the dog. Anyway,
Milo the
dog. Let's talk about, I don't think Richard ever meets Jess. So give me some of your thoughts on Emily's meeting with Jess in Swan Song.
Extreme. Let's maybe not call people hoodlums. But again, Emily is just quick to pass judgment, and a lot of that judgment stems from how a person looks in terms of how they dress, in terms of how they present themselves. And it's important to note, but it's also disastrously wrong to pass that level of judgment in the way that she does. You could have someone roll up in a suit and tie and be like the creepiest, weirdest individual under the sun. Looking at you, Chase. Or you can have someone, roll up like Jess, who may be, just, leather jacket, shirt, ripped jeans. Doesn't make him a bad person. And so for Emily to just instantly look at him and just be like, oh no, like, this is probably even worse than the last one. It's just, we talked about how much we were going to throw Emily under the bus. Here's the bus. Yeah. Okay, Regina George.
Yeah.
Again. Maybe try and see how happy this guy is making your granddaughter, and how much they have in common, and how much, they have in terms of like the love to read, and how much he is very much supportive of her, and just give their relationship a chance, because again, it's not your right to step in and interfere, but that's Emily's MO.
Yes. I mean, to her credit, she does try to at least be nice to Jess and be understanding that he was late because of traffic. And, she puts in the effort to be friendly and to not maybe jump to conclusions this one time in her life. But it's the situation at hand that causes a lot of the strife, at least up front. She even tries to be like, oh, there's no salt and pepper on this table. I should go get some, to give Rory and Jess a moment alone, because it's clear that like Rory is like worked up about the black eye. Emily doesn't question it. Rory's the one who's making a big deal about it. And so, on an intellectual level, Emily knows that this guy is important to Rory because they're dating, and the situation is tense, and she's trying to like give them a minute, which is nice, actually. Doesn't last very long though, because when Lorelai calls the next morning and tries to credit Emily with like actually having a mature response to something for once, she goes off and calls him an abominable thug. And yeah, and I also find it funny in the previous season rather, with A Tisket a Tasket, when Lorelai starts picking up on the chemistry with Rory and Jess, and she doesn't want them together, and she's trying to counsel Rory out of it. Emily backs her up on this, and that's what sends Lorelai into a tailspin. And she's like, then she backtracks basically everything she said. She's like, you know what? I have to trust you. If you like Jess, that's fine. Like, just Emily's approval just suddenly made Lorelai just completely change her mind about it. But anyway, speaking of Lorelai, I think her interactions with Jess are even more interesting than Emily. So let's move on to Lorelai.
Mm-hmm. This is where I would actually flag Lorelai on the play probably a bit too much. Jess did have some behavior that was rebellious, that was not great. Like, him trying to snag a beer out of her fridge. I get it. If I was in her shoes, I'd probably be like, nope, I'll just take that right back from you and drink it myself, in the same way that she did. I can understand that being a cause for concern. Fast forwarding to when, the car accident, and now your daughter is injured as a result of that. There were a lot of things that were playing out within the nature of their relationship that is obviously going to give Lorelai, but I think any mother in that situation, pause about the young man that your daughter is currently dating. So I can understand that. But I think she takes it to a level of almost like border, like not full on hate, but just like borderline, like you're maybe hating on him a bit too unnecessarily, or in a way that's just not appropriate for the situation. I mean, she's even called out on it. When she meets up with Max, and she's talking about Rory's new boyfriend, and Max instantly is just like, ooh, you really hate him, don't you? She's like, no, I'm fine. And she's like, no, you really hate him. I think she needed to be better at scaling back just how vehemently she was not okay with Jess. And she wasn't the only person. I mean, Lane definitely had her hang-ups with Jess as a boyfriend to Rory as well. But Lane did better at it in a way where I think Lorelai should have and could have, especially as the mother. But you need to be able to have that balance of being concerned and looking out for your kid versus being like, I can't just dump on him because I don't like him. I need to let my daughter have this chance and give her this opportunity and therefore afford her boyfriend a little more grace than what I've given him.
Yeah. I mean, in Lorelai's defense, a lot of her early interactions with Jess were very negative. Obviously, we have the beer incident you mentioned and his sass with her when she tries to, again, extend an olive branch and like make nice with him and not even bust him on the beer thing. And then we have the basket festival where she sees that Dean is upset by this and she sees Rory kind of, not treating Dean the best. Then we have the bracelet incident where she kind of chews him out for trying to interfere in their relationship. And then we have the car accident, which is like, it's pretty huge. And even though her reaction is outsized, it was still a big deal. So that's not very good. And then she hears about the kiss at Suki's wedding, and she's like, you need to stop dragging Dean's heart through the mud here. Like, make a choice. If you want to be with Jess, fine. I'll help you get vaccinated. But, I don't think, like, to your point, I don't know if she showed him enough empathy all the time. I think she liked to think that she got him, at least at first, but she never really extended any further consideration after that point. She just sort of slipped into hating him a little. But again, to her credit, she didn't actually try to dissuade Rory too much, and she did try to put aside her own issues with him to be supportive of Rory, and even didn't go off the handle when Rory came to her in this episode in Swan Song and say, I'm thinking about it, even though I just told you I was too busy to even think about it. Maybe I am thinking that this could happen with Jess. And so Lorelai keeps some of her opinions to herself for once and just lets Rory make her own choices and tries to trust Rory enough to manage this on her own. And then I guess the only other thing I really have to say about her and Jess is that, like, I don't know if they ever actually truly, reconcile doesn't feel like the right word, but like by the revival, they're civil to each other. But we don't know sort of what their relationship looks like now.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I think, they obviously were at different places in their life at that point. But I love how they were at least able to come back for what we saw in the revival and just be like, essentially, hey, you doing good in life? Yeah. Are you doing good in life? Yeah. Are you happy? Yeah. Like, they both cared enough to like check in with one another and see, like, are you happy? Are you successful? Are you doing okay in life? I'm still asking this question because you're still important to me as a person in my life. It could have just been like, oh, hey, what's up?
Yeah.
Don't care about you otherwise.
I wish we had seen more of their adult interactions with each other, especially because he's Luke's nephew. Like, I think that lots of stuff probably happened in the interim that we have no idea about. And that's kind of sad because it'd be great. All right. When we first sat down to record this, we were like, do we think we can keep this to 60? No, probably not. We're probably going to go to 90. And it is now an hour 29 into recording. And we still have a big one left. But there's two quickies I want to mention before we get to our last guy. So briefly, we have Trevor. The only really notable thing about this is that Emily is horrified that Rory asked a boy out, even though he was a Yaley. She didn't think that was proper date etiquette, and she let it be known to Rory that it wasn't proper socialization. And Lorelai, she's accepting. She's like, yeah, you should go on a date. You've had boyfriends, but you haven't really tried dating. So she did push her to spread her dating wings a little bit with Trevor, even though she seems a little more curious about the naked guy situation, which brings me to Marty. Again, Lorelai expresses some care about like their friendship / interest in each other, perhaps. And Emily and Richard are like, I like that boy. But there's not really much to these characters. So, do you have anything on them, or shall I move us to?
No, we can just keep going to the last big one.
All right. Logan, go off.
I will in the future extensively. So come back for that. But we have already been going along for this one, so I will try and keep my thoughts concise. Emily and Richard love Logan because he's a Huntzberger. And when that family name is instantly the first thing where you're just like, yep, sold. When's the wedding? Let me walk you to, like, who's walking you down the aisle? Like, when's the date? Can we get the, save the dates made up? Like, let's go shopping for a wedding. It's stemming because you love the Huntzberger name and you're just equating like, oh, she's, going to marry into the right family and the right breeding stock. No, we cautioned it with how they respond to Lorelai's men and them potentially not being good enough or not having the right family name. But you can't go on the other end of the spectrum and just be like, it's okay that you're accepting just because of what the surname is. Thankfully, Logan was not, but like, what if Logan was, again, just, physically abusive to Rory? You're going to overlook that because he's a Huntzberger at that point? Like, that's an extreme example. But again, my point is just that they were so in love with the family that she was potentially going to wind up in that they were, I think, probably going to overlook a lot of stuff if it ever came up. I don't love that the upper class seems to do that with one another in terms of arranged marriages, potential partnerships. Like, you date this person because this is what we deem correct and appropriate, and we're just going to organize it. So there's that. I do love, it's unrelated, I do love, the whole Emily just railroading Shira at the benefit dinner because she needed to be railroaded at that point. You too, Bit Gold Digger. So yeah, Shira and Mitchum needed to be called out, and they were. But this is about Logan and their response to him. It was pretty much okay. I mean, they did have some blinders on in terms of naivety with like the pool house and that situation, and Logan's not the innocent young man that I think you want him to be for Rory. You don't need to bring a priest over to get that figured out. But I think their response to him on the whole was colored by the last name more than it should have been, but they still treated him with respect in a way that they really never gave to any of Rory's other boyfriends. So that's also noteworthy, even if it's stemming from a very weird and not okay place.
Yeah, they are immediately approving of him, basically. Like, Rory hasn't even referred to him as her boyfriend yet in person before they jump to weddings and how cute their kids would be with his blonde hair and her blue eyes and weddings on the Cape and all of this. They like automatically jump to, this is the power couple we're shipping now. Like, they just 0 to 100 on Logan. They're like, yes, here for this. And even Lorelai trying to put some doubts into their mind, saying like you're pushing this too hard. They're just kids. They're still figuring things out. You're being too heavy-handed with these hints. Like, yeah. And she even like clumsily tries to tell them about the incident at the wedding where she finds them in the back room, as if like that should somehow color their opinion of him. Like, it's not going to change anything. And like, they're kind of shocked that she's not thrilled with this match. But yeah, they're a little too like, yeah, I'm on board real fast. So there's that. They do change their tune on him when they find out about the premarital sex, but for the most part, their interactions with Logan are good and positive. Other than like when they think maybe her sex with him is derailing her life. But on this note, we have to address the male Yale party, which is kind of where we see a lot of these sparks flying.
Indeed.
With Rory and Logan in the first place, and Dean breaks up with her, paving the way for this relationship. So give me some of your thoughts on the male Yale party.
Where do I even start? It's really ostentatious for me. You laugh, but
I laugh because you're right. Oh, the diamonds? Come on.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, like, it just makes me, like, my mind flashes to, like, people that I would expect to see, like, you know, it just makes me think of, like, Kate Winslet and, like, all the first-class people that we see on the Titanic, where it's like, let's just flaunt our wealth and our privilege and look at all these diamonds and these jewels that we have, and, you know, cheers to us being, you know, top billing in life. And it's like, I feel like that entire party was just a really ostentatious display of that wealth and them just patting each other on the back. And I hated it for that reason, because it's true that, like, that's just what happens and that's how these people are and that's how they live their lives. But I don't need to see it or be reminded of it or have it put in my face. And it's just a direct, I think, especially like for Rory, who her mother has raised her to try and avoid that lifestyle and be more, you know, you have two legs, stand on them yourself. Don't absorb this privilege. Don't just fall into these traps. Attending a party and social engagements like this are just going to, like, lead her down that path of just, again, being more privileged and self-centered that she needs to be. So I don't also love how that was kind of not an end result for her, but it just feeds into all of that in a way, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's an interesting one.
No, go ahead.
I love this episode for starters, but I just find it really interesting because, you know, obviously this is when they find out that Rory and Dean are back together, and, you know, this is the impetus that Emily needs to go to her estranged husband and say, we need to talk. This party is the start of their reconnection. They're remembering that family is important, and communicating in the best interest of their granddaughter trumps whatever issues they're having. So they come up with this plot to get Rory over for a Yale alumni party, which it sort of is, but it's all alumni and their eligible sons, right? It feels like presenting Lorelai Gilmore all over again. They parade her around in front of a bunch of other rich people. Look at our granddaughter. She's beautiful and smart and single, you know? Like, and as I mentioned, the diamonds, you know, they really doll her up. They cover her in ice. Like, she wears a tiara. And like, Logan comes into this party and demonstrates that he can float in the world of the Gilmores, but also that he doesn't take this world too seriously. Like, he can show up and participate just fine, and he's on Rory's level intellectually as well, with being into journalism, being very well read, being a Yaley, but also that, like, it's not all that matters to him. And so, you know, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you decide to look at it, it works like a charm. And Dean shows up, sees her like this with guys like Logan and Colin and Finn, and he recognizes that he doesn't fit into this world, and therefore he doesn't belong with Rory. And then, you know, obviously we have Lorelai calling them, and Richard says, Rory's in a new phase of her life. She needs to be exposed to different things, different people. And when she's ready to move on, she'll have met some nice young men who represent the new phase in her life. So like they're like, Dean's probably a nice young man, but he's not right for Rory. Rory needs guidance. You're so little help in this department. We have to step in. We want more for her. It's too late for you, but it's not too late for her. They want to make sure she gets what she deserves, and so they set this up, and it works. And they get Logan, who's a much better fit for her than any other guys in their minds. But
yeah, but like it strikes me that, like, you know, you say like, oh, the new phase of her life. Like, no, it is a new phase of her life, but it's, you know, just, oh, Emily and Richard are getting what they want. And
yeah,
it sits so wrong with me because, again, it's just, oh, she's finally with someone that will approve of. Her happiness is irrelevant. It's just finally like a match made in heaven that we can approve of because it's going to make us look good.
Yeah. All right. We are staring down the barrel of this being our longest ever episode if we don't wrap this up real quick. So give me your Coles Notes thoughts on Lorelai's responses to Logan.
Saw the privilege, knew that it was probably pleasing for Emily and Richard, and, you know, fought it because it's just, again, Lorelai is going to always want to knee-jerk react to do the exact opposite of what Emily and Richard are going to be doing, but I think was still able to recognize that Logan made Rory happy, that there was chemistry there, and even if she took issue with the relationship at times, stemming from like a classist standpoint and a social, like, you know, privileged standpoint, and just not wanting that for Rory, she was still accepting of it and cool about it when she needed to be.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with all of that. Like, she clearly doesn't like the upper class world of wealth, and she sees that Logan espouses that unapologetically, you know, at least until season 7. And she doesn't love that. She doesn't love the casual relationship that they start out having, even though that's pretty much a perfectly normal thing to do in college. Rory's not wrong when she's like, this is college. Like, we can do whatever we want. It's good for people to date around. And if you decide not to be exclusive, that's completely your prerogative. Lorelai's maybe being a little overprotective, but then again, Rory's pretty sensitive, so I kind of get it. But yeah, she's not always the happiest in terms of, especially the early trajectory of their relationship, but she gets on board eventually and is, you know, similarly to the other guys, she is just supportive as long as Rory is happy. Mm-hmm. But I do love that that Logan goes to her to ask for her permission to marry Rory, and that Lorelai's like, you don't need my permission. It's up to Rory. That's lovely. And the other thing that I think is notable about this is that, like, when they go to Martha's Vineyard, even Luke eventually gets on Team Logan and ends up liking him. So I think those are kind of the most interesting things about their reactions to him. I'm sure we'll get more into this. Like, we will have a whole character deep dive on Logan eventually, and we might talk about his relationship with Lorelai more there. But we're running really long. So I want to just have one last very quick mention of Rory's most recent boyfriend, and then we'll fully wrap this up. Paul. Obviously, Richard has passed, so we have no idea what his opinions of Paul were. And Emily and Lorelai are both right there with Rory, forgetting of his existence entirely. So, anything else on Paul?
Live your best life, Paul. Go be with a partner that is not going to forget that you exist, and just run away. Like, run, Paul, run.
Yeah. Hashtag justice for Paul. I guess the one last thing I would say about him is just that I wish Lorelai would have been more surprised when she found out that Rory had cheated on him multiple times with more than one person. But yeah. I don't think Lorelai doesn't seem like the kind of person who would completely forget about Rory's boyfriend. I don't find it believable. And again, I hate that a human was used as a punchline.
Agreed.
All right. Whew. We did it. I thought this one was going to be shorter and easier, but
I anticipated that as well, and here we are.
Here we are. Anyway, let's wrap this sucker up.
Yep. You guys know what it is, but we're just going to issue you a couple of quick reminders. Every week that goes by, FanFest is getting closer. If you don't know what that is, we have a link to it in the description below, but it is basically a Gilmore Girls weekend in Algonquin happening this fall. If you want to get tickets to it, please check out that link below and consider attending. It's going to be a really great time. You're going to meet the cast, people who worked behind the scenes. You'll make a lot of really just great new friends. Consider going to that. As always, go back and check out some of our old content if you want more GG stuff while you wait for next Friday's episode to drop. And please always do all of those YouTube things for us. Like this video, subscribe to our channel. One click, you guys, and it really does just help us out a lot, and we're so grateful for it. That being said, enjoy your Friday night and have a great weekend.
Come back next week because we're going to be talking about Rory's journey to the Ivy League. We're going to be talking about college admissions, high schoolers going through that process. Obviously going to touch on Lane and Dean and all those kinds of things. So that'll be a fun one because
we've got
your girl's a huge nerd.
Good thoughts on that. Yep.
Yeah, I had like 71 pages of notes. So tune in for that because it's going to be a ride.
Yep. Right on. Join us for that. In the meantime, again, have a good weekend, and we will see you next Friday night for dinner.
Bye.
Bye.